Okay, so I may have changed from what you watched above around the graded work because the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what, I actually want to focus specifically on what I'm about to do here. So I'm going to walk through part of the decision app and give you examples for how to talk about code because writing about code, writing code, and then talking about code all add to your understanding. So what you'll do is watch this and then reply with any questions about this code step through. And then you can reply to a post and attempt to answer a question, to answer or comment on what they posted. Now you can also here ask a question about step 4, but that's not required, but it is a good place to ask because that way other students might prompt them to think about that as well. Okay, so I have opened my decision app. I have a couple of entries in local storage that are then brought out to be rendered into the page. I do have some data updated into the form that I haven't submitted yet. So one thing I could start is by right-clicking on this button because I know when this happens, if I hit inspect, I get some really good information actually. I get that there's actually event listeners setting on this one button. One is for the DOM because it's listening for the whole page. One is for the click because we actually have a click for any time the page is clicked. And in this case, submit. Right, so I know that I have a submit handler or a submit event listener, and I know it's on my form itself. And if I wanted to click here, it would actually take me to that place. Now I had already set a breakpoint, but in that case, that helps you understand because our form has multi-event handlers, okay, not just one. The one that I'm going to walk through is a very common one we use all the time, and understanding is important, but there are others, and that's why I started with the right click and looking at. So again, right click, and if I hit inspect, it'll take me to my event listeners for that specific button, but also for the other things that I walk through. All right, so I'm going to drop that for a minute. Oh, I'm going to go back. I should have actually kept it up. Inspect, go to my source. And so for me, I have that breakpoint. Okay. So now in here, when I click, because right now my breakpoint is not activated, I'm going to hit which workout. And so what this is doing is it's going to call from my imported module, my form handler, and I can see that there actually is 3 functions that are available for me to call from that module. Okay, and one of those is get form inputs. Okay, remember I can only call what is exported from the module, so that's important to understand, and we'll see this again when we get to the next one. That's why I ended up changing my name for the next one, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So now what this is going to do, it's going to call this function. It's not passing it anything, and what it'll do is once it's finished, it will return whatever has been determined to be returned, and you'll see this in a minute, to now be what is stored in form data. So it runs this function that is inside the module, and then it returns something. If there was not a constant here of a variable, that means it wouldn't be returning anything. But in our case, we know we are returning because of the way the line is written. So let's go ahead and step into. Okay, so now we are at the function, the get form inputs. It is going to return. So immediately inside the function, there's a return. And what is it returning? It's returning an object literal. Okay, this object literal has key value pairs. Now, some of these key value pairs have some OR logic that says if the entry ID input, meaning if we were actually doing it, if it had an ID value, we would set that, or if not, we'd just set this to null. So the energy score for me is just a parse int on the value, or it's its default value. Okay, and it's not until I get down to here that I actually run a function. So one of the things you would want to know is, like, I might ask, okay, it's going to return an object, but what's the next thing that's going to happen when you hit step? Because it's not ready to return the object until it determines these last 2 values, and in order to do that, you actually have to run this function past this value. okay? Now this value has been set up in the global space, okay, on this module. So that's where it comes from. Okay, so those type of details are good to know. So now I might ask again, if I hit step right now, where does it go? And I'd hit step. Oh yeah, so it's going to go to get radio values. Again, if I scroll down, right, get radio values was my first function call, so it can't create this object until it runs this function. It has created these two values, but it hasn't created the whole object yet. Okay, so let me continue to step. So now it's going to so now we're looping over what's passed in the radio buttons, all of the radio buttons, and then it's going to return which one is clicked. So this is looping and logic that determines which one is clicked, and when radio.clicked, which in this case, right, is a true or false, right? So this is a true or false. When this is true, and that's what's important, is when that is true, then it runs what is in the block. Okay, so I'm going to step, looking at the next one, and you can see each time which one it's reviewing. Okay, so now I'm going to hit, because the radio, and this is good to know, the radio is actually the local block scope reference for each of the radio buttons, which in this case is a node list. We could think of it as an array. Okay, so we come through, and then as soon as we hit the one that we know is actually warm, then we are going to return its value. Okay, so now we're actually, and it didn't even show us coming back here, but I know it did, okay, because it actually started getting my range value by looking at my input. So now I had to do a little bit of logic for that, which basically I passed in the input, which was my range, and I said, hey, if it has a value, okay, and in this case, if it has a value, then I'm going to parse in it, which means convert it from a string to a number. And so when I do that, it's going to say, hey, return. Now, if it doesn't, it'll just return 0. Okay, so that will be its drop through, its default, if the logic does not work. So now I have all of those items, those key value pairs, let me say it correctly, ready to be returned. And if I wanted to see what was in them, I could come over here, because this is like, here's what's in that returned object that has been set. Okay, so now I can actually look inside of that, inside of DevTools. And the reason I can't come down here and do it is it hasn't been defined yet. And when we pass it back, we're just passing back a reference. So now I'm going to hit step. And so now if I scroll over here, I can see that returned object now is available to me inside of the handler that I could actually go down if I wanted to and look at in more detail. Okay, so now I'm going to call my next function, which is a part of, I ended up modifying this name because there was a decision ID already on the HTML, and sometimes it's hard to see this, but I can see in this case when I scroll over, I only have one function available for me to call, and it's the one I'm going to call. But now, unlike the other one, I'm actually passing it the object, or in this case, a reference to the object that was created. Okay, so when I hit step in here, that now becomes data in this module that I will then use to run functions to determine factors for each of my inputs that I got from the form. So I'm now into this code, so where I'm going to call this function, I'm going to pass this key value, okay, so the key, the object and the key. All right, so if I do data, I can see, oh yeah, that's right. So data is the object itself, and then data.tempType, so as an example, now drills down into that specific key inside the object. So now when I call this, right, so now I haven't called it yet, I'm ready to do it. That means this variable is not defined, because again, I'm calling the function, I'm passing some data to it. And when I do that, then it runs through and it returns a value to me. And in this case, it's taking my input of my energy score. Okay, actually, I think that's my sleep score, my energy score. Okay, and then it's going to run through some logic and it's going to determine, oh, okay, so in this case, oh, I know what it is, right? So now I've done that. And now if I hit step, okay, ooh, I should have actually could have done that as well. This is defined. I was just looking at that real quick. And by the way, this is why it is so good to walk through code, because sometimes you've written so much code that sometimes you have to remember, oh yeah, what is my code doing, right? So let's actually go ahead and step in. So now I'm looking at Friday. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to see, was now if I roll back, I can see what was returned from here and I can see what was returned. So each of these factors are the things that go into my decision making by running my functions. Okay, now in this case, these are not really anything I'd want to show, but I do want to talk a little about my ultimate decision. So I'm actually going to jump over this one and jump over this one because we know what gets returned. We get so know those three factors. So now comes the big one. Now comes the one where we're going to pass it all of the factors to actually make the decision. And this is where having these functions broken down in more detail can be helpful, meaning more concise functions themselves. So now actually let's walk through this. So for my determine workout decision, I ended up setting up a local variable inside of my function just as a blank, or in this case, I've defined it and I've assigned it, but there's really no value for our app. There is a value of an empty string, okay? So then I handle the high priority case. If my pain is high, then I just go ahead and return. Ooh, I'm gonna fix that. I'm glad I saw it. It says, hey, if my pain in this case is equal, right? Meaning it is no workout today, then boom, if I hit that, then I would return. But in this case, right, there's no change based on the pain level that I indicated. So now I run through my logic that I had before. So then I'm going to run through each of these to determine what kind of workout. And again, what it's doing here is it hasn't hit the one that determines it, which or assigns it, right? So it's dropping through my if logic. And now I do have a workout. So I do a regular workout, and in this case, see, now that I'm seeing it, I'm needing to put something in there about, pain level or something on the actual workout. So now if pain is equal to do not modify, right, or do modification if it's equal, if pain. So now we're checking the value of what was passed in on the string, and we're saying, okay, there's actually no change here, right? So no change. In this case, it hasn't, there's no change here. So this one did not get tripped. So in other words, this, when we evaluated it, was false. This was false. Okay, so when it's false, it does not hit and run this block. Okay, so now I have an or. So if pain is equal to no change, or if pain is equal to no impact, then I return the final workout. Okay, and that I can do, but I did also have a fallback, right? A generic fallback suggestion. Okay, so now I've built up all of the values that I want to return, and I have an object that I'm now returning. Okay, so unlike what we saw in the form handler, where it set up the object, it ran the functions, and then returned it, in the decision.js, it ran and it broke it down because there was much more to do, so that made sense. Okay, so now I already have this object ready, so I hit return. Hit step, and now it actually assigns these key and values, right? So key values, and the values came from running the function and returning the values. So now I have two objects, right? And so what we do here is we say, hey, I'm entry to save. So I'm going to take, and we learned about the spread operator. So it's going to take everything in the form data, right? It's going to take everything in the decision results, and it's going to put it in an object, okay, object literal. And that allows us to have all of our input data, our decision data, all in one object that we can then pass around for doing other logic with. But the first thing we're going to do after we set that up, so now we can see, oh yeah, all of that comes together. So now we're going to say, hey, if entry to save ID, So if it's null, that means, right, we have not saved it. We are actually going to do, in this case, we're actually going to save it new. So what would happen here, right? So we know this is null. So if the whole thing in this case would be false, okay? So if we stepped into this, then we know it drops into because this is all the things that would happen if that's true. Else now we're actually doing a create. Okay, so now we're going to call entry to edit ID. So now we're going to assign that ID by calling our data store generate unique ID. So when we step into here, we know we run. Now again, we have an exported function inside the data store module, and we're going to say, hey, take whatever the day is now and do a toString on it, create an actual, in this case, a UUID. UUID is, and a unique ID is fine to say that, but it's a unique ID for every entry. Now you might wonder, why do we need one? And the answer is because of the way our form has to identify those specific entries. So let's go ahead and step. Okay, so now we're back. We have now that ID assigned. We're going to put in a timestamp, and then we're going to look at this workout entries, and we're going to push an array method. Okay, we're going to push that whole object. So we're going to say, hey, look at the array, do a push, which is a method on the array, and push that entry to save into there. Okay, because right now, if we were to look at this, we'd see there's 0 and 1, which means there's 2 entries in here. Okay, and so as soon as we hit step here, we could go look at the entries to save, and we would see it's hard to see actually over here. I would actually probably do it here. Actually, I would roll up and look at it here and see that I now have 0, 1, 2. And remember, arrays are 0 index. The length is 3, so 0 represents the first one. Okay, so now that I've done this logic, so this is the logic that handles that if it's an entry to save, if it has an ID, that means I'm doing an edit, and then I have to do all the logic for the edit. Else I'm going to do, creating a new, and then I drop into whichever case, whether it's an edit or whether it's a create, I'm going to go ahead and save the entry, right? Because right now, if I go over to my application and I look, I only have 2, because right now, what is listed in entries is just in memory. Okay, sorry, and workout entries is just memory. Now I'm going to call on my data store module, save entries. I'm going to pass it that reference to the in-memory workout entries. Okay, I'm going to hit step. I'm going to go, okay, set that local key. So basically, I'm overriding it on this step. I'm saying string, JSON stringify that data, and then set the local item. So if we actually could see in the internals of the memory, we'd actually see that if we go back over here to application, that actually got completely overwritten at that point. Okay, so we'll go ahead and step in here, and then we drop back, and we're like, okay, so now we're ready to display the results on the UI itself, right? So if we step in here, this one's pretty straightforward. The thing you'd want to look at here is we have to set up each of these. Now, because these are outside of the form, we have an ID for the entire section, and then we're doing query selector, something I didn't talk about too much when we looked at the form handler, but we generally only have one ID for the container, and then we do a query selector for each item. So here we're just basically setting those results. So we're saying, hey, reference that workout display, set its text content, right? So we're setting this, and then we're setting each of these values here. So we'll just set those and then return. So we're calling, I didn't even talk about this, but hopefully by now you've caught it already. We have in this module, this function that is exported, so it's available to us to call. Okay, so now we're actually going to set this decision style, make it visible. Oh, it was already because of what I had before. And now I'm back to here. And now we're going to call the table renderer. Okay, so we're going to pass the table renderer all of our in-memory workout entries. We're going to call render table, passing it our entries in memory. And in this case, and this is important to understand, we're also passing it right, to callbacks. So we're saying, hey, render this table and pass these things into it. So we have a reference to the handle delete entry, the handle edit entry, which are where? They're not inside of here, they're actually inside of the app.js, okay? So we're just passing a reference over to them, okay? All right, let's kind of get through this. So now we're saying, and in my case, I did a little logic that says, hey, if we have callbacks, which we should, because I've set that global variable inside of there, and I said, hey, set that to callbacks, set callbacks to that underscore callbacks. And then I did some additional logic because of some of the things I was seeing. I said, if not a workout table, then there's something fatal, return back. So it's just more fall through. I'm going to say, hey, if there is something in here, let's go ahead and clear it because I'm going to render this new. And then I say if entries is equal to the length of it is equal to 0, which we know is not in this case, but if it was, then it would just hide that, do some UI for no entries, and then clear all data button, clear that as well. Else, right? So let's actually go ahead and fall through this. So else we're actually going to show the table, to take off the no entries, right? Because we do have an entry, and clear that. And now we're actually saying, okay, now display that table, right? So we'll do that. We'll put that to no, and then we'll clear that. And now we're going to sort them. And this is where understanding we're taking in all these entries, right? All the entries that are in there. We're going to sort them by A and B means look at first one, then second one to determine which one based on my sort, my default ascending sort. And that's when I minus these timestamps to figure out which they are. And so I could go through. And by the way, every time I'm doing this, it's looking at the next entry. And you could look at, in this case, what's A and what's B. Okay, so you could look at, oh, okay, that's the actual B. So if I look at the date of that timestamp, okay, I see how it's comparing, subtracting these to find which one to put first. And now that I have them, getting close. I know where it's a little bit long, but now we're going to loop through. So now we have the heading of the table. We'd already set that up in the HTML. So now what we'll do is we'll iterate over the sorted entries. And for every one of them, we'll refer to it as entry in this block. And then we'll create the row element, and then we'll append it in. So we come over here, we call. Now we've set up our first entry. That's what it is. We're going to call create table. We're going to pass that first entry to it. And so now we're calling a function in the module, and this sets up the row. Okay, the row is the TR. So if I came down here, I could see, okay, oh, actually I haven't set it up. Yeah, actually it should be row. So if I hit row, TR is the table row. Okay, so the data set. In this case, we're going to give it an ID of this entry ID. That's what allows us to read it later to have its ID. And now we're going to set the HTML of the row, but we're going to do it by actually setting up these values with the helper functions. Okay, so for every TD, in order to set that, it has to call it. And actually, I remember now one of the things I have to do for step 4 is I need to write a new helper function here for pane. Okay, so if I do this, I can see it stepping through each of my little helper functions, returning user-friendly strings. Yeah, looking at a switch statement for strings, that makes sense. And looking also here, I'm using that same, repeating, reusing that module. And so now that I've walked through all this, I have my buttons, right? And then I have on each button, I'm attaching those entry IDs so that I can uniquely identify them. And now I return the row, okay? And now what I'll do here is, because notice I haven't appended it into the DOM, so I'm going to reference the table and I will append it with the row element that came back from calling create table entry. Cool, and now we'll just go through each one and do that. So now I can just kind of say, you know what, jump over this. Cool, I know what that's going to do. Cool, I'm going to do this. Great, and now I'll clear. All right, so now I'll go up here. I'll clear my form handler. I'm not even going to go over this one, and then I'll reset. Oh, I guess I did. And then I reset my states. All right, so that just gives you 25 minutes, more than I normally do. But hopefully, and maybe out of this comes questions. We covered a lot of the code, but not all of the code. There's definitely some more stuff in this code base, but this should give you at least, oh, TR. I was like, I have an error? No, that's when I tried. Oh, by the way, I could have done the TR after and seen the whole way the row got built up before it was appended into the DOM. All right, I look forward to any questions that you have out of this walkthrough. Talk to you later.